So we'll get started with this. I'm going to run through some of these general gardening info slides. Can you see those slides, Charlene? Are
I
those
can.
being shared right now?
I
Okay.
can.
This is just a bunch of information I threw together, kind of information that would take you from, what do I want to do with a space that I have to put some plants in? Like, what is the purpose of that space? All the way through to planting, to maintenance, to then harvesting, throughout all the seasons. So I like this first slide, the quote that I have on there: "Things grow where they are planted." It gives you a sense that things in your garden are deliberate. You put them there on purpose, and you care for them, and they always give you something. And then sometimes nature plants things, and if something pops up that's beneficial, um, you let it go and let it thrive and take care of it along with the things that you've cultivated in that garden. So we'll get going on this. The first slide, I think, do you have a green thumb? Do you have a brown thumb? Are you somebody that kills plants all the time? I'm a gardener and I kill things all the time, and I just keep trying new things. I think everybody has a green thumb. There are definitely some rules to taking care of plants. There's some do's and don'ts, but plants will kind of tell you what they need and when they need it if you're paying attention, and they'll talk to you if you're listening. They'll tell you what they want. Like this picture on the right here, this little plant with the "Help Me" sign. When I look at that, I would say, okay, this plant is, some of the leaves are dying, but is it actively growing on the top? If it's still actively growing, maybe that plant just sheds those bottom leaves naturally. If I pay attention to that plant and what it does throughout its growing cycles and throughout the season, I might know that those leaves are just going to turn brown on the bottom, and I can just remove those, let it grow from the top, and it'll be okay. I need to pay attention to how much I'm watering things. Whoops, sorry. Messed up there. How much am I watering? If it's a potted plant, let the water run through all the way through the bottom, and then let it dry out a little bit. Don't just water every day. Not every plant needs that. And if I'm watching that plant every day, I'm noticing what it's doing day to day, how it changes, how it goes through the growing season. I'm going to be able to react to those changes throughout the growing season, and make adjustments to how I'm caring for that plant. So always, always, always in your garden, look at your plants every day. They'll tell you what they need. When you get started with a space, what do you want to get out of that space? Do you want to grow flowers for beauty? Do you want to have a bunch of produce? Do you want to grow some medicinal plants? Do you want to grow a space for a hobby because it brings you peace or joy? Do you want to have a bunch of produce to share with your neighbors? Any reason that you have for a garden space is a good reason to plant a garden. Plants create beauty and produce and medicine for free. Those are gifts. And if you nurture that space, those gifts just kind of keep coming. A life creates more life. And there's almost no end to it. So decide what you want to get out of that space ahead of time. And you'll be surprised how much that space will give you. And don't be afraid to experiment with new plants. If you see something that you like, don't plant anything in your garden that you don't want. You know, if it's fruits and vegetables, plant things that you like to eat. Um, and experiment with different things. They're all individual things that take a little bit different care. So there's here at the top of this slide, um, there's a big difference between annual plants and perennial plants. Annual plants they'll grow, they'll flower and reproduce, and then they'll die all in one year or in one growing season. Um, Perennials are a little bit different. They'll come back year after year after year, sometimes for decades and decades. Sometimes those perennial plants will grow nice and big and tall and beautiful and flower. And then at the end of the season, when it gets cold, they'll die all the way back to the ground. The root systems are still alive. They'll come back in the same spot the next year. So those are the two different kinds of plants. There's some variations on those. Sometimes there's annuals that are hardy that can kind of live in our environment and come back the next year. For example, a tomato plant is a perennial in tropical environments. Here, we're not in a tropical environment, so it'll die unless you find a way to save it. So if you don't want to buy plants every year, you have to figure out the way that that plant reproduces itself. If that's from seed, if it can root itself from a cutting, you can save those annual plants for next year, or you can propagate perennials or annuals for next year, or just make copies of things that you already like in your garden. You can make copies of those year after year after year. This plant in the picture here, this is borage. It's a great flower. You can actually eat the flower. It's one that if you plant it, it creates a lot of seeds. It's a good pollinator plant. It'll make lots of seeds and it'll drop them. It's one of those plants that once you grow it once, it'll come back every year and just pop up because it drops so many seeds. So if you pay attention to how the plant behaves through the year, how it propagates itself, you can save those plants year after year after year. So annuals and perennials. So when you're thinking about growing plants, annuals, you typically have to replace them every year. Perennials come back year after year. So what will grow here? This all goes off a growing zone. So we are in zone 8 here in the Willamette Valley. It's kind of the perfect zone. It's right in the middle. Doesn't get super hot in the summer. Doesn't get super cold in the winter. So lots of things grow here. You have tons and tons of variety to choose from. Back to growing zone. So again, kind of a perfect spot right in the middle. The growing zones are the lower the number of the zone. Again, we're zone 8. The lower the number of the zone, the colder the average temperature during the year. And the higher the number, the hotter it gets. So you can grow more cold tolerant plants here in the Willamette Valley just fine because it doesn't get too cold for them in the winter. During the summer, it might get a little bit too hot for them, so they're going to take a little more care during the summer. Here in the summer, it's basically a desert for 3 or 4 months in the Willamette Valley. It doesn't rain very much. So again, those more cold tolerant plants will take a little bit more care in the summer, but in the winter, they'll do just fine. On the flip side of that, things that like it really hot are going to love it here in the summer, but they're going to struggle in the winter. So if you if you're going to a nursery and you're like, hey, will this plant work here? Check the plant tag. It'll say what growing zone that plant likes. And if it's right around zone 8, it's probably going to be fine. Give it a try in your garden. Throw it in there. And if it comes back the next year, it's a good plant for here. Again, when you're looking for plants to plant in your garden, how much sun exposure that plant needs is super important. If they're a full sun plant, they're going to want full sun for most of the day, 6+ hours. And then part sun and part shade is less. Most plants like part sun. They're going to do really great. If they have a little sun in the morning or sun in the middle of the day, and then they have shade the rest of the time, they're going to be pretty happy. And then full shade plants, those ones are kind of challenging. They really like full shade under the canopy of big trees. So when you're putting things in your garden, if it says it's a full sun plant, it's going to perform best in that full sun environment. It will probably grow in part shade or full shade and be perfectly happy, but it's not going to do what you want it to do. It's not going to flower as much. It's not going to fruit as much if it likes full sun and you put it in the shade. Again, check the plant tags or the information on that plant, what the sun requirements are, and if it's going to work in your space. So if you're setting up a new space during the growing season, check when that space is in the sun and record the amount of time that space is in the sun for during the day. And then you can go out and put the right plants in there. Again, try different things in different spaces. Plants like a variety. Most plants like part sun just fine because they're not cooking all day in the sun. When to put things in the ground. Again, check your plant tags, seed packets of when to start things. Think ahead of time. So if I want to grow vegetables for my garden, I know that I can't put those things into my garden until after the last frost, which is usually the end of April, beginning of May. So I need to start those plants well before that in February or March so that they're ready to go in my garden in May, at the beginning of May. So I have to think a month or two ahead of time before those things are going to go in the ground. Some plants like to go directly from seed in the ground in your garden. Some do fine with starts ahead of time indoors. But everything's a little bit different and has a little bit different timing. The information on plant tags and seed packets are super helpful for when to start those things. In general, I like to plant perennial things in the fall, right towards the end of the growing season, or the big end of fall, beginning of winter, because that gives those plants time to get established in the ground and those roots to grow before spring happens. And those plants are going to need more water. They're going to have more roots. They're going to be a lot happier. If I wait to plant those perennials in the spring, they're not going to have a well-established root system, and I'm going to have to water them a lot more during the late spring and summer when it gets hot. So I like to plant those perennials in the fall. Annuals, you're not going to be able to plant those until, again, after that last frost, end of April. They're going to have less time they need less time to get established because they're used to growing just in that one season. And then just avoid planting things in the middle of the summer and the middle of winter in general. Spacing, like how much How much room does my plant need? Those plant tags will tell you how big that plant will get at its mature size, height and width. That's how much space that plant needs. Um, there's always room for one more plant, though, I like to say. So if you think about like competition with plants, if you think about a forest, how much space do those plants need? Everything has its own space and they're all thriving. Well, there's not a lot of bare ground. Nature hates bare ground. It'll take over all the bare ground with something. So you can really pack plants in to a space. Again, if you're going for production of fruits and vegetables, you don't necessarily want that competition. If you're going for a more natural look, you don't really need to have any open ground. Things will fill their space and make room for each other, kind of naturally. Just put a lot of things in the ground and see what happens. Some things will do really well and take over, and you can pull those back a little bit. Um, but most things will find their own space. This graphic on the right, oh shoot, this graphic on the right is what's called a Three Sisters planting method. That's corn, beans, and squash. And they're completely covering the ground and completely packed in. They like to grow like that. They like to grow together. They actually grow better together than they do separately. Um, the key with that is the more living roots that you have in the soil, the more productive that soil really is. So pack things in there. Don't be afraid to do that. The ground will find that balance eventually. Another word on soil. So, what is soil made out of? Um, in a natural environment, it's everything that's living and dying above and below the soil builds soil. Rocks and minerals are ground up, and you have decaying matter. But what do plants eat? Well, they can't really eat dead stuff, in the soil. All those little microorganisms and invertebrates and little microscopic guys and bacteria and fungus are eating that decaying organic matter that's in the soil and actually feeding those plants. So the more organic material you put into your soil, the more you feed those microorganisms, the more they're going to feed plants. So as long as you're kind of continually feeding the soil, the healthier your plants will be. And there's lots of ways you can do that. You can compost, get a little composter, finish your compost in the composter, add it to your garden box or your garden bed, kind of on a continual basis throughout the year. You can do a thing what's called chop and drop. So if you have a garden bed, plants live, they do their thing, they flower, they die back. Cut up those parts that are above the ground, leave the decaying roots in the ground, and just put those leaves and sticks and twigs and old flowers on top of the soil, and that will eventually decompose and get down into the soil. You can also put down wood chips, mulch like leaves, and in the fall put a layer of leaves on top. All that stuff will break down and become soil. It takes about, like for wood chips, it takes about 2 years for those wood chips to sort of become soil. Leaves are a lot faster. The smaller you make those chunks of organic matter, the faster they'll break down. As long as you start with good soil and have a lot of life in that soil, you just add a little bit every year or throughout the year, and that will continue to build good soil. And then one more note on that. when you add synthetic fertilizers, it actually is detrimental to those natural processes of building in soil. Once you get that going, you just kind of sit back and the magic happens, and you'll have good soil year after year. Um, Questions we always get about watering, like, how much do I water a plant? Well, I don't know. The plant will tell you. Um, I tend to stay away from like a regimented watering procedure. You know, sometimes your garden doesn't need water every day, um, and all plants are a little bit different. Um, Annuals will need more frequent watering because, again, they're not established as much as perennials. Perennials like a deeper, less frequent watering. So, deeper down into the ground, and then you don't have to water them as much. Plants will kind of tell you what they need. Um, Look for the leaves curling or the plant drooping, things like that. The ends of the leaves turning brown when it's time to water. Um, Avoid watering in the middle of the day. I like to water things in the morning, um, but just not in the middle of the day. You can do it at night too. And then the last part of that is kind of a good rule, especially things that are potted or in containers. Soak the soil until the water percolates down through the soil, and then do that a couple of more times. You want the water to get all the way down to the root tips and beyond, so that those roots can keep reaching down towards where the water is going. If you just water the top of the soil, um, like every day you water just a little bit on the top, the roots will just kind of go out across the top of the soil and they won't get deep. When they get deeper, they get down into more nutrients, and they're more resilient when it gets really, really hot out. Few notes on like some maintenance stuff, like pruning and harvesting throughout the season. If you're growing flowers, perennial flowers or annual flowers, if you prune dead flowers off, it will encourage more flowers to come. Annuals, they just kind of do their thing and they grow and grow and grow and make lots of flowers. If you pick the little flowers off, they'll kind of encourage more growth, but generally you just kind of leave them alone. Perennials, prune those at the start of the season to kind of get things into shape, and then prune spent flowers throughout the season, and sometimes you'll get a second growth of flowers. When you're pruning, you're going to want to prune things for like a desired shape of the plant. Do that early in the season, and then you can kind of encourage branches to go a certain way if you want when you prune. One thing that I like to do with pruning is if I'm growing like a plant for flowers, for like cut flowers, and I see part of that plant is dying back and it looks like it's maybe not very healthy, I'll cut that dead part off, and then I'll monitor the plant. If it continues to die, I know something's wrong. But if that dead part just goes away and it's done, then I can monitor the health of that plant if I take the dead stuff off. One last note on pruning. If you're growing plants for fruit and you cut, some plants have fruit buds and branch buds. If you cut branch buds off, well, that's fine. If you cut the fruit buds off, you're not going to get any fruit on that plant, maybe that whole year. So again, if you get to know some plants in your garden and you can notice, oh, well, that's a fruit bud, I'm going to leave that alone. And if I'm growing for fruit, I want the plant to put energy into those fruit buds, I might take a lot of those other branches and foliage off to focus on the fruit. Um, so again, all plants are a little bit different. The better you know them, the more you'll know what to look for with that. Okay, now we're to the question and answer session. So encourage you to check out edibleyamhill.org, and then you can email us anytime at that email below.